Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of When I Grew Up. On this episode, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome my guest, Dr. Abraham Kim. Hey Dr. Kim, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. Great to be here, Blair.
Thanks so much for giving me your time tonight. I'm sure you have your hands full with a lot, but again, it is my honor to be able to chat with you and just hear about your story. So right now you're located in
Washington, D.C. I'm right outside, actually in Virginia, but our offices are in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll just jump right in. What are the offices that you are talking about, and what is it that you do, Dr. Kim?
Sure. So I'm the executive director for an organization called the Council of Korean Americans, and it is an organization. Our mission is to amplify the national voice of the Korean American community and to invest in the next generation of Korean Americans in areas of leadership, both public and private sector. And so, what all of that means is that we make sure that Korean Americans' interests are represented, whether it's in the federal government or it's in corporate environment, and we make sure that we work with leaders to open opportunities so that Korean Americans can serve in leadership roles, whether it's running for office, whether it's serving in C suites, they say like CEO or CFO or whatnot in corporations, or even just becoming a leader in your community, to in your schools and other places like that. So our focus is leadership, and how to ensure that Korean Americans are participating, whether it's civically or in the private sector. So,
This is totally my jam because
yeah.
because I am all about this. What everything you just said, I'm like, yes. How do we do that more?
Mhm.
How can we create that space? Excuse my ignorance.
Yeah.
I might ask you
Yeah.
some questions that maybe seem obvious to some, but not to me. But um, everything you said sounds so amazing and so
Mhm.
great. And I'm curious though, you gave examples of like, oh, like creating the space or allowing
Mhm.
opportunities for people to like be like in leadership roles, like
Yeah.
C-suite and things like
Mhm.
that. How does the Council of Korean Americans like do that exactly? Like,
Mhm.
what are the steps that one would take? Like, does someone come
Yeah.
to you
Mhm.
first or?
Yeah, so we work with other leaders, people who have already achieved leadership roles, and we work with them to provide, like you said, space and opportunity and education for whether it's young people or current professionals who are interested in going into leadership roles, about how to become a leader, what are
Mhm.
some of the important skill sets, and also, just sometimes it's just informing them about opportunities where people can actually apply for these jobs or be recruited for these jobs. I think there's a number of aspects about being a leader. One is there's the personal capabilities, right? An individual needs to have the talent set, right? And oftentimes it's really about it's not only about what you know in terms of your expertise and your proficiency in industry and being an expert, but it's also about being your ability to connect and communicate with other leaders and other people and people who are willing to trust in your ability to make decisions. And then through that, they see you as a leader, someone who can provide a direction and vision and a
Mm.
mission for an organization or a company or that sort. And so part of it is, a lot of these things, it's you don't learn this in a classroom. In
Mhm.
fact, it's oftentimes it comes through mentorship. It comes through people who are more experienced sharing their experience with younger people who are less experienced in these areas, and how to think about problems, how to think about leadership, how do you persuade people, how
Mhm.
do you mobilize people, and how do you drive a community toward a certain direction, right? That's all about leadership, people
Right.
following you, right? And
Right.
so there's a knowledge component and an experience component, but there's also a community component to this too, which is
Mm.
oftentimes leadership is about opportunities, right? And uh, having other people have confidence, other leaders having confidence in your ability to lead and advocating for you. So leadership roles are often scarce. I mean, there's only a few. They only pick one leader, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And there are multiple people perhaps vying for that one leadership role.
mhm,
And in order for a community to determine who's the best leader, um, you have the people that are pushing you forward, advocating for you, or opening doors so that you have the opportunity to interview for these jobs or are
mhm.
aware of these jobs. And so it takes a community to support leaders, nurture, push them forward, and open those doors. And so back to your original question, how does the CKA or the Council of Korean Americans, my organization, help in these areas? One is, of course, as I mentioned before, the capability building and the soft skills
Mhm,
and the human relationship skills that you need to learn. We provide that kind of training through our
mm,
various programs, but also as a community of leaders, we represent many different industries, from the arts to finance to corporate to academia and other places. And as leaders, we are aware of job opportunities. And so we're able to recommend or to help nurture people and direct them to particular opportunities that they can apply for. And we provide recommendations and we push people forward into these roles too. So as a community of leaders, we ensure that Korean Americans have just as much opportunities as other communities from other ethnic and racial groups can have uh, can access these
right.
leadership roles throughout our country, our industries, or our communities. So,
That's brilliant.
sorry, it's a little more long-winded than I anticipate,
No,
but that's
no.
but that's some of the things that we do as a community or as
No,
an
yeah, that
organization.
makes complete sense to me. I guess, again, a lot of these careers that I get to talk to about people in
Mhm.
interview, you don't really think about what goes into each situation.
Yeah.
But even in this, I'm like, yes, I mean, how does it happen, And I was even looking at the CKA's website.
Mhm.
I'm like, wow, these are some really established and Korean Americans, that I have no idea, like that there are so many active Korean Americans
Mhm.
in such humongous leadership roles. Um, and so how does one actually, before I ask that question, Dr. Kim,
Mhm. Mhm.
what does a typical day look like for you then in this role as executive director?
Well, I think every day is different for me, but a lot of my time is spent on how to um, I spend a lot of time talking with people and
Mm,
engaging with people and getting to know our members as well as the work that they're doing, right? And so one of my roles as the executive director of this organization is to help connect people together or connect
mhm,
the dots.
mhm,
And as I'm learning about people's journey, their history, some of the challenges and opportunities they have in their lives, in their workplace, in their family life, or other areas in their community life. Um, Everyone has needs, right? Everyone has needs, and everyone has some kind of resource or talent. And so one of the roles that I play is as I talk to various people, all it becomes very clear that, oh, person A should be talking to person B because this person has a need and person B has the resources, but they're not necessarily communicating together. And
mm,
so we make the introductions and uh help to hopefully create mutual benefits, a win-win for both individuals. So that's one area, right? Like
mhm,
whether it's in business or whether it's in they're trying to solve a problem within their community, or something as simple as they're trying to put a workshop together and they need a great speaker, and they need someone to someone with a certain expertise, and we know that a person over here on a different city has as an academic who has that expertise, and so we introduce them together so that they can help each other. So that's, I guess, one thing that I spent a lot of time. So just basically human relationships and connecting and getting to know the community. Second is really trying to inform the community about all the important things that are going on that impact the Korean American community. There's a reason why we're here in Washington D.C., because we're keeping an eye on what's going on in the federal government as well as other parts of the country, and so if there are things that are whether it's successes, like certain Korean Americans were elected to certain prominent roles. We like to highlight that because they become important role models, and we really do believe that seeing is believing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why representation is important. Whether it's maybe someone became a leader in media, right,
Mm-hmm.
or a person becomes elected to a specific role, we like to highlight that, and so but also there are issues that may impact our country, our community negatively,
Mm.
whether it's legislation or even just within the last few years, we've all experienced to a certain extent the rising violence against Asian Americans, right?
Yes.
And so and different things are happening in different parts of the country, and DC being kind of the hub of politics and society and so forth, we hear a lot of things that are going on around the country. So informing the community in all the different areas, whether it's in Atlanta or LA or San Francisco or Chicago or Seattle, we have communities in all those areas and members, and so we inform, we highlight both the good and the bad,
Mm-hmm.
but also how people can take action to help support their communities in our country. So I mean, these are rather kind of broad things that I'm talking about, but basically human relationships, communication,
Yes.
and also how to also build bridges with other communities, with other
Mm.
ethnic and racial communities. So we have a lot of peer organizations within the African American community, uh, you know, Chinese American, Thai
Sure.
American, all the other Asian American communities, and how can we as people of color or minority communities can work together to address issues related to whether it's racism or whether it's economic opportunities or other areas like that. So I'm involved with a lot of meetings and
Yes.
meeting and
Yes.
connecting and building bridges. So I would say those are some of the kind of broad sweeping tasks or issues as a national organization that we are involved in on a daily basis.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine having to, I mean, speaking on the missional kind of overview of the uh, Council of Korean Americans,
Mhm.
all those things would seem very important. Um,
Yeah.
so, how long did you help found the Council of Korean Americans?
So I was a founding board member
Okay.
when this organization started about 12 years ago.
Okay.
But I think, um, but what's interesting about this organization is that I would say the genesis of at least kind of people's feeling that there's a need for such an organization actually
Hmm.
started as far back as 1992,
Okay.
during the LA
Yes.
riots, and so the people that was a part of are what we call the LA riots generation, right? So
Hmm.
we were all college students or young professionals, and for
Mm.
those of you who are not familiar with the LA riots, I resulted coming out of the Rodney King trial, and as a result, there were the acquittal of the police officers that were had was filmed, beating up Rodney King, resulted in a lot of domestic turmoil, right, in Los Angeles, and um, and a lot of that the violence went toward Los Angeles,
Mhm.
excuse me, toward Koreatown in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
and much of the damage was in Koreatown. But a lot of Korean families were impacted, and I think a lot of historians see this as a case of what happens when a community has no political representation, media representation, is insulated, isolated, has no really had not spent the time being civically engaged in building bridges with other communities, right? And so as a result, the Korean community there was very vulnerable. And I think one of the lessons learned out of there was that Korean Americans, actually, the concept of Korean Americans, many historians believe that it came as a result of the Korean of the LA riots, which is interesting
That
where
is fascinating.
Koreans felt like we are not no longer we can't think of ourselves as foreigners in this country, even though
That's
we were
right.
born here, but we need to think of ourselves as Americans, and we need to be civically engaged and to be directly involved in civil society and building those bridges and in
Mm,
ensuring that Korean Americans are running for office and being in media and speaking out and so forth. And um, so that in that era, a lot of us felt like we needed a national voice, but it took some time because there were many efforts to create national organizations, but things weren't. There were a lot of regional organizations, but not a national organization
I
there.
see.
And so, some 20 years after after that, um, council was established because we just didn't see a national organization. And so, rather than just talking about it, we thought, let's just do it and see what happens.
I
And so,
see.
that's the 2011. The organization was established.
And so the genesis of it, so I understood the history, which is really fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
I was born in 88, and then I
Hmm.
moved from Anaheim, California to Atlanta um, when I was 4.
Hmm.
So my parents grew up in Southern California, and just at the peak of that, I think that's when we left.
Yeah.
And again, I was too young to obviously know what was going on or
Hmm.
anything. But when in the last, I think maybe I would even say like 8 years, and especially like in the last couple years, where we've
Yeah.
seen a spike in Asian American hate crimes and things like that,
Hmm.
is when I feel like there's more talk about the LA riots.
Hmm.
But for you to kind of share kind of this is that was a time where there was no kind of backing or advocacy
Yeah.
is so fascinating to me, because
Mhm.
I feel like even my own parents, as you're talking, I was thinking about my own parents.
Yeah.
And I mentioned to you before we started recording that they immigrated here when they were really young.
Yeah. Hmm.
And there is this kind of like ownership and arrogance, I would even say, right?
Hmm.
In their identity not just Korean, but we are Korean Americans.
Hmm. Hmm.
That I've taken on as well.
Yeah.
Um, but sorry, I'm going on my
No, no, no. I
tangent.
mean, these are important identity issues that
Mm,
we are all um, discussing and evaluating, and also, our community has matured over the
mhm.
years, right? And
Yes.
so we have more and more people that are taking this issue of voice and having a voice, having representation very seriously. And so that's why it created the ecosystem or the environment so that an organization like the Council of Korean Americans can emerge
Mhm,
and
mhm.
grow, right? And so and people see the importance of why we need these kinds of organizations to exist to bring our communities together across the country. So, I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of back in 1992, there were only a handful of Korean American lawyers, right, who
Mm,
really were able to um, represent or even speak on behalf of the Korean American community in the Los Angeles area, which had the largest Korean population,
Right.
outside of
Right.
Korea,
Yes.
outside of Korea. And so, and it came down to, you may have heard the name Angela Oh. I mean, she was like literally the sole voice representing the Korean American community back then.
Mm.
And since then, of course, I mean, there's an explosion of Korean American lawyers now. So many lawyers that, uh, but in addition to lawyers, there, today we have four Korean American Congress representatives.
Yes.
We have numerous representation at the state level, and including Georgia. They have quite a few Korean Americans that are serving at the state level
Mm.
and at the local level too. So it's progress. It's important progress,
Mm.
and but we still have a lot of work to do, left to
Yeah.
do, and so organizations like ours, the Council of Korean Americans, is trying to ensure that that momentum is continuously fueled, and we're pushing forward, and that and that we are identifying Korean Americans, whether it's in Georgia or California or Kansas or Illinois or wherever, are we've identified we're support, we can't, we're not a political organization, so we can't directly support these,
Mm-hmm.
people who are running for office, but
Mm-hmm.
we can make aware to our leadership community that these people are running for
I see.
office, and so they can choose to support them if they want to. And yes, many of our community members have stepped forward to support many of these leaders
Great.
at the local level as well. So, yeah,
Um, I don't know how to ask this question, Dr.
yeah,
Kim, but I'm
mhm,
just gonna ask it.
sure.
So, like, why is it important
Mhm.
that Korean Americans are represented? Like, I know why it's important to me,
Yeah,
but for you, like, why is it important to um, be a part of this council that
yeah,
helps Korean Americans move forward and push
yeah,
forward?
yeah. Um, it's a great question, and for different people, it might be for different reasons.
Hmm.
But I think first of all, number one, I think Korean Americans are some of the most creative and most imaginative and most qualified and highly educated
Hmm.
people. If you look at and they have much to offer as Americans of Korean descent,
Mm.
and that we are part of the fabric of American society and what makes the United States the dynamic, the wonderful, the rich, uh, country that it is, and
Mhm.
the Korean, uh, Americans of Korean descent are an essential part of that, right? As
Mhm.
as others are as well, right? Um, and so as other ethnic or racial, we should have opportunities for leadership, but unfortunately, there are sometimes structural and even cultural reasons why uh, Korean Americans are not able to achieve that, right? And sometimes it's self-inflicted, like as I mentioned before. Sometimes it's something about our own culture. I mean, you know, between Korean Americans, we have a culture of burying your head, right? Or
Yes,
not
yes,
speaking out,
yes.
or or not focusing so much um on the importance of relationships, right?
Mhm.
And we have these narratives within our immigrant society and culture that I think at that time, our parents, when they shared with us, understand why, like, I'm sure your parents and my parents said, you know, when your friends were out playing, they said, stay home and study, right?
Mm.
Or try hard, or just through your own efforts, just or even being competitive amongst Korean Americans
Sure, yeah.
with each other, right? Which is
Yeah.
which is unhealthy, I think, and well, completely understand because it was a survival
Yeah.
mentality, right?
Mhm.
But survival mentality only gets you so far. In
Mm.
fact, it isn't. I mean, this is very counter cultural, but I think in this next generation, the second generation of Korean Americans, we should be telling our kids to go out and play,
Mm.
right? And to learn how to build a relationship within a multicultural society. How to have help them to have cultural competence, right?
Mhm.
Being able to play with kids or engage with people from India, from Russia, from China, from mainstream white communities or others. And so having that ability to engage and interact and navigate and also lead people from different communities is an essential part that to be a leader
Yeah.
in the future. And so our kids need to know and learn how to do that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And not just among Korean Americans, right? And
Mm.
so that comes from not necessarily burying your head in the sand and
Yeah.
studying all the time, but comes with engaging with people. And
Mm.
so part of that is a re-education of the next generation of our leaders. And so that's in part what we're doing as an organization. It's
Yeah.
like we got to focus on community, we got to focus on soft skills, we got to
Mhm.
focus on how to make it's not just about what you know, but it's who you know
Right.
and how that community supports you. So
Right.
that's one thing that we're trying to teach,
Mhm.
and but also but there's outside structural things too, right, that are
Mm.
preventing Korean Americans and or even just Asian Americans in general, right,
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
reaching leadership roles. And so we need to break those things, right, or
Mm.
at least identify and work toward um, resolving those issues. Like, for example, just from a data set, um, so perhaps some of the folks in your audience uh, may know what a board is. Board of companies, right? Fortune
Mhm.
500 companies. So Fortune 5, um, boards are important leadership roles within companies, whether it's like Meta or Google
Right.
or IBM or any. And but within the Fortune 500, 5%, 5% of the boards are made up of a little over five are African Americans, right?
Okay.
Little over 3%, 3.3, 3.4 is Hispanics, Latinx, that community. Asian Americans is actually lower than that. It's like 3.2, 3.1.
Really?
So the opportunities for these Asian Americans to be in these high leadership corporate roles are very limited. And the question is why, right? And sometimes it's structural, right? And sometimes it's like we don't have those opportunities. And again, it comes back to community pushing forward. And unless you have people in those boards advocating you, and oftentimes Asian Americans are the ones that are bringing other Asian Americans in. But if
I
you
see.
have a small number to begin with, you can't bring a lot of those opportunities aren't presented to Asian
I
Americans.
see. I
And so
see.
so those are the kinds of issues that both internal to our community and external to our community that are preventing us from taking on these important leadership roles
Mm.
and opportunities. And so I guess back to your original question of why I'm doing. So, part of this is we're trying to change all of that.
Yeah.
And uh, because I personally believe that Korean Americans have a lot to offer, and there are obstacles in the way, and we're trying to break those down, right? And so that's, um, but also again, there are decisions being made all the time that are impacting our community,
Mm.
whether it's at the government level, whether it's in businesses or other things, and we need, you know, if decisions are being made about our community, we should be at the decision making table, right?
Right.
And
Right.
to be able to shape that. And again, that it's about leadership. It's about opportunities,
Mm.
and so that's why it's important. The work that we do is to make sure that our members of
Those.
our community have access and are at the decision making table. And
Mhm.
then there's the funny joke or metaphor that says if you're not at the dining table, then you're on the menu, right? And so meaning there, people are making decisions and that may be counter to the interest or in the health of your community,
Right,
and so we want to
right.
ensure that we those our communities are protected, right? And
Mm,
so and we get access to all the opportunities that are open to us, right? So um, so those are I guess again back to your question of why is this work important? I
yes,
mean,
yes,
I think um, those are some few of the reasons what drives me, gets me up in the morning,
yeah.
and also motivates our community to do the work at the council. So
Absolutely. No, I mean, as you're talking and sharing, I myself am being challenged in my own thoughts because, everything you said, I completely agree with, but I feel like I don't do much thinking about it. And, what you were saying just now about how, as Korean Americans, we do make up um, I forget what word you used, but just like the DNA of what America is,
yeah.
today. And I don't in my small suburb of Atlanta, I don't really think about the impact that should be happening as a Korean American myself, right? And
Mhm.
then I think about my own children, 6 and 4,
Mhm.
listening to you, kind of excited for their future because I feel like, in 15, 20 years we'll be hopefully we'll be further down than we are today, which I truly believe will happen.
Mhm.
But at the same time, the challenge comes from you to me is how am I being proactive in that,
Yeah.
so this is really great, Dr. Kim. I
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you're doing now in terms of educating young people and
Mm,
inspiring them, this is an important role, right?
mm,
We need to educate. We need to change people's really point of view of the world that you can do this. This is
yes, you
possible,
can. Yes.
and the fact that someday there may be a Korean American president of the United States, right? I mean, so we need to be dreaming in those ways, right? And there's going to be, and I would say within the next, maybe even next 10 years, there's a very strong possibility that there could be a Korean American Supreme Court justice.
Mm,
There could be, we have 4 Congress people.
wow.
Well, if you think about it, 4 years ago, there was no Congress, hadn't had, there was one some 20 years ago in California. And then finally in 2018, Congressman Andy Kim
That's
won
right.
the election in New Jersey, and he's the first Democrat to ever win as a Korean American, and in a district that is predominantly Republican, and so he won that, and we didn't think he would win, but he won, right? And so and then a few years later, now we have 4, right? So 2
Mhm,
Republicans and 2 Democrats,
mhm.
right? So things are growing
Yes,
exponentially,
yes.
and so someday there'll be a Korean American senator or a Korean American cabinet official, and I guess Korean American president, and so that's all within reach
That's
possibility as of what.
crazy to me.
And I mean, we have a Korean American, we have astronaut, we have Johnny
That's
Kim,
right.
um, and we have Korean American, you know, even just with all, I'm sure you and your audience are aware of all the pop culture in terms of the Korean culture that's
Yeah,
taken the world by storm, whether
that's
it's
right.
food or music or movies or TV shows and other things like that. And I think culturally too, and the image of Korean Americans have improved dramatically because of Korean culture,
Mhm.
and we're lucky to have this. We have Korea, kind of our motherland, I guess you can call it, and then there's the Korean American community, and they're both mutually reinforcing in terms of the images, right? So there's a tremendous opportunity for our community, and if you think about, we're only about in the United States, we're somewhere between, depending who you ask, 1.8 to 2.5 million people in the United States, right?
Mhm.
And we're the fifth largest Asian American group, but we really punch above our weight in terms of as a
Yeah.
community. Um, and So, and it's kind of cool to be Korean American these days too, right?
It
Because of
is.
all the
It is.
pop culture stuff.
Yeah.
And people ask me about shows and groups and pop groups and stuff. I have no idea. They know a lot more than I do. So I just kind of nod my head and I said, yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah. Of course I know BTS. Yes. Blackpink and all the other
No,
um
but that's true. It's like it's trendy,
yeah.
to be Korean American. But so uh I mean, I'm assuming you did not set out to be the executive director of Council of Korean Americans from a young person.
Yeah.
So I mean, I am curious. I joked around with you a little bit before we started recording that um, we haven't had many like seasoned guests on. We've had John Cho on.
Mhm.
It's a more of a younger crowd from the beginning, just because that's my network as of
Yeah.
now. But I feel privileged that some wiser people are coming on to share their wisdom. But yeah, I mean, how like what was the genesis for you? Like, what did you set out to do in life when
Mhm,
you were a young person? You're still young. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you.
mhm. No, I'm getting older. I'm middle aged. So yeah.
Um, but yeah, could you maybe touch on that a little bit? How things got started for you? I did read some of your bio and
Yeah.
it is very impressive, Dr. Kim. So that's why I hesitate for you to like jump in full force. But at
Mm,
the same time, I would love to know the journey. A lot of what I've heard on this podcast is
mhm,
you start somewhere and then it doesn't go according to plan at all. And then
mm,
you do something else and figure things out along the way.
yeah.
However, yeah, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I think life is not linear, right?
Mhm.
And I think there are many surprises along the way. And so in many ways, I've stopped planning for my life, I guess. Um uh but I started off, so I studied international relations government. That's
Oh,
kind of that was
okay.
yeah, that's my background. And I went to, I think I mentioned I was born in California, and I went to, so I lived in California most of my younger life before I graduated from high school. And but I lived in Korea briefly too because my parents had immigrated. I got married in the States. I was born. My sister was born in Southern California, and my father was a graduate student and my mom was a nurse. And then my father got a job back in Korea, and so we moved to Korea, and I lived there for like 3-4 years. And then I came back to the States and I went to boarding school as a in high school, and my parents stayed there. So I guess technically I left home at the age of 13 or so.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and then graduated from high school in the California area. That's where my boarding school was. And then came to the East Coast. But I studied international relations, and my father was in government and international relations, that space too. So I think there was a little bit of parental influence.
Mhm.
But I think I was always interested in history and government and international relations and those kinds of things. And that's the career path that I followed. And I worked in DC. I was doing internships and things like that. But but even with that general direction, I mean, my if you look at my career, it's a little bit kind of zigzag on different areas. But I've worked in um, I've worked in the national security world. I've worked in private sector finance. I've worked in think
Mhm.
tank world. I've worked in academia. I've worked in, and now this is kind of like advocacy world.
Mhm.
But I think the common thread that I don't know if it was by intention, but I just happened to work in that space is what I call leadership decision making space.
I
So
see.
and So I used to, when I was in the national security, I used to do war games, and so tabletop exercises, and helping, so creating scenarios, and helping putting leaders through these simulations to make decisions, and oftentimes they were generals getting preparing for a future war, or those kinds of. It sounds a little kind of weird and quirky and stuff like that, but that was training for a lot of
Like
decision makers in the military.
this
So
was this was your job.
that was my job. We would create these
Wow.
scenarios. So it's kind of like, I may be dating myself here, but it's kind of like, um, it's kind of a weird metaphor, but like Dungeons and Dragons, right? But
Okay.
but training, but the players were really like officers, right? Military, but they're
Oh,
planning, not, they're not fighting dragons and that kind of stuff, but they were actually preparing for a future theoretical war with a future enemy with certain capabilities.
I
And
see.
so it was helping them to go through the whole planning process and how to make decisions based on limited information. And so this is kind of the training that, whether it's a military officer or whether it's policymakers and things like that. So helping, again, that's leaders helping them make decisions. So that was kind of the government space that I worked in, and then I moved into finance, doing political risk, so helping investors making investment decisions based on political decisions
Oh, wow.
and politics, and the space is called political risk. So I did that for a number of years, and then went into the what's called the think tank world, which is policy research and things like that, and doing research and writing, position papers or thought pieces about particular policies and the potential ramifications of policies. And in particular, my area was U.S. Asia relations or U.S. Korea relations, and
Mm.
how should we deal with North Korea? Back then, it was like, this is
Right.
before North Korea developed nuclear weapons. Well, what's the ramification? What's the implications? So that's providing a decision paper, policy perspectives to policymakers, like whether it's congressional leaders or State Department officials and things like that. And um, yeah, um, and then academia, I was more teaching and
Mm.
did conferences, and now I'm in this space where helping, we're working to help Korean American leaders, right? Think
Mhm.
about leadership in society and communities and so forth. And so and training the next generation of leaders and the potential societal and political and economic challenges they may face in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years,
Mm.
and what kind of challenges leaders will face, whether it's issue based or even just mental health, right? And
Mhm.
physical
Mhm.
health. We often forget that leaders are humans too, and we need to take care of the individual as well as, the all the factors and communities that they're in that they have to lead as well. So I would say, again, I just thinking back at it wasn't intentional, but I guess I gravitated to work that was in this space of helping decision makers or leaders make better decisions, right? And based on whether it's information or whether it's particular kind of support or training. And I guess that's where I got find myself here today.
Right,
so
right.
so
I mean, I am so curious. There was no Council of Korean Americans, I'm sure, during the times that you were in these different spaces,
yeah.
and these seem
Mhm.
like, very, very important roles to be a part of.
Mhm.
Who was advocating for you? How did you end up in those spaces themselves?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of us in kind of my generation, we didn't have a lot of mentors, right? Or Asian American mentors. I
Right.
mean, we've had mentors and advocates, perhaps, that are not Korean Americans, but mentors nonetheless. And
Mhm.
I think, I'm grateful to these people that
Mm.
help open doors, saw me for, I guess the potential that I had, and invested in my life in terms of really helping me to, guide me, helping me make decisions about how to move forward in my career. And um, I mean, it's one example. My like literally my first job out of graduate school, I worked in a think tank,
Hmm.
doing U.S. Asia relations and writing uh, papers about North Korea and other things. And my boss was not a Korean. He was American general, retired colonel. Um, but he came from the military, and so he had a real kind of understand. The military has a strong culture of mentorship, right? And developing leaders, and my boss was a retired colonel from the army, and he really took care of his young people, right? People
Mm-hmm.
worked for him, and in particular for a young analyst like myself, what happens in Washington D.C. is that these senior leaders, when you get to a certain point, you have a lot of support staff. They spend all their time. They actually do all the writing for you, right? And all the research. So you don't have to spend time. And they write the paper. They take a look at it at the last minute. They make a few corrections, and they put their name on it, and they publish it. And it's their paper, right? And
Right.
there's no evidence of there was someone else who helped you write that, a document. But this boss was different, where he would not only he would definitely, he would be author on it, but he would also put the author, the junior staff who helped write that paper.
I
So it was
see.
a co-author.
Yeah.
So as a junior staff, over time I accumulated all of this publication, right? And
Mm-hmm.
experience, which helped me to get into graduate school later, right?
Mm.
And so that's what I mean by people who are advocating and
Yeah.
providing opportunities. And if I had written this paper and submitted to some journal or some magazine, they would never pick it up, because I'm just kind of, even though it may
I
have great
see.
content,
I see.
it would, but because it had my boss's name on it, it
Sure.
had the credibility. So his credibility and the research I did helped to put that into these
I
journals. And so
see.
I got my name. So technically, I've also published in these very highly respected journals.
Mm.
So that's a very specific case of how a senior mentor, by working together, it was a win-win, right? He got an article, I got an article, but I wouldn't have been able to get into those journals without his prestige, which he leveraged to help me get my name into publishing it in those journals, which later, when graduate schools look at this, they go, "Oh my goodness, this young analyst has 5 publications at these prestigious journals." Um, help me differentiate myself from other people who are applying for the same graduate school, and
Right.
therefore was able to go to those graduate schools, and it gave me a leg up. So that's the kind of support that I was very fortunate to receive. And but I was one of the lucky ones, right? And not everyone has these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that more and more Korean Americans who are in these leadership roles have the responsibility to, again, be teachers. Not just pioneers, but they need to be teachers in helping provide pathway for other Korean Americans to get into. And so I need to play that role for other Korean Americans,
Mm.
and provide those kinds of opportunities. I mean, what I just shared was very specific, but there are other ways we can do that. And so all of us are involved in this organization
Mm-hmm.
because we are building the organization and opportunities that we wish we had when we were much younger. And if so we weren't able to have these opportunities when we were younger, but we know that we can build the opportunities so the next generation will have those opportunities. So we're building foundation stone, so that the next generation can build and build and build, so that the challenges that we faced in our career development or in our leadership development, hopefully a lot of those basic problems won't exist for the next generation, and they can just continue to thrive and build. And so that's some of the motivating force
Yeah.
behind why this organization exists, and and why I'm involved in this organization. And
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
we never imagined, and I never imagined being here, but we all realized that we needed a collective place where leaders who have a common value system and a vision for the future for our community need to gather and to work together to synergize. We're more effective together rather than working individually.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
this is how it came about. And I'm one of the privileged, honored and lucky ones to be at the right place at the right time. And so I was offered this job to help lead in this role. So, um,
I mean,
so yeah.
I am like so excited for now and the future. Like it's
Yeah.
just so encouraging and affirming for me, and even just what I believe to be true too. I okay, to be honest,
Mhm.
I have never really faced like adversary. Like I, as
Mhm.
a Korean American, or at least that's how I feel. That's
Yeah.
how I've lived my life. And I grew up in like kind of an affluent white neighborhood.
Mhm.
And so I've never felt a certain way about being Korean American until recently, actually.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I think it's just in recent years that I think my perception, or just even how I view myself in a predominantly uh, Caucasian community, that I don't know what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
other than like I never really thought it was that important, I think. And then when I
Mhm.
had my own kids, it became more apparent that I do find it important. Um, with that being said, we are rounding out our hour together, Dr. Kim, and I apologize for asking a
No,
few more questions,
no,
but
it's fine. Mhm.
like, did you face adversary in that way as far as a Korean American trying to, go to be in these important roles?
Mhm.
And do you did you face
Yeah.
racism, Dr. Kim? Just gonna say it. I'm trying
Yeah.
to tiptoe, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, yeah, when I was a little kid,
Uh-huh.
I did face overt racism, people calling
Mhm.
me names and things like that.
Mhm.
But I mean, and I think we've all experienced something of that when we were growing up, with other kids and so forth. I think what we all well, sometimes we're not even aware of is we face structures that are, I guess, biased against us, but we're not even aware that it's
Yes,
biased against
yes.
us,
This
right?
is true. Yes.
So, but I think how to think about this rather than like fighting against the structure or the system, as they say.
Mhm.
I think it's really about putting ourselves in a place where society is changing constantly, and putting um, Korean Americans or Asian Americans or just anyone in a place where they can be a part of helping to formulate what the new next generation of society is like. And um, so I like to, how it's been explained to me, and this makes a lot of sense, is that, and in terms of also career choices for our future generation, is that, when our parents came to this country as an immigrant, they came from Korea and so forth. They came into a system, and and they came as they thought of themselves as guests. They came into the system, and they had kids, they had us and so forth, and they said the key to succeed in the system is education, right? You
Mm.
need to succeed, get a great education, and become professionals. That's how you get to the top of the system, right? Become doctor, lawyer, or business person or whatever. But stay away from the arts and politics and those kinds of unpredictable and those kind of squishy career fields, right? So a lot of those became doctors and lawyers, right?
Mhm.
And became professionals and business leaders and so forth. But I think what we all realized almost at the same time, which is kind of weird and eerie, but I understand. But all of us, kind of second generation, realized that we became professionals. We went to the top of that the societal system, but there's a ceiling in terms of for our community, right? And you're welcome. That everything's great as long as you function within that system, right?
I see.
And what the challenge for the next generation is, and for our kids, or even just this generation, is that, but that system is not fixed. It's constantly changing, right?
Uh-huh.
And the professions that help to shape ideas and the next generation of society and so forth are the places where our parents, immigrant parents, told us not to go into, which is politics,
Mm.
which is academia, which is our, innovation, R&D, entrepreneurship, is the arts,
Mhm.
is media, is entertainment, is, all these idea forming, idea shaping, perspective, altering professions, right? Arts, media, entertainment, politics, entrepreneurship, all these areas. We need the doctors and lawyers, yes. We need to continue to need them. But we also need people. We need to push our kids in these creative spaces, right? And
Mm.
so, and they will help take their identity and integrate it into what tomorrow's America will be like, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why, even as an organization, we celebrate the arts, we celebrate entrepreneurship, we celebrate innovation, right? Because these are the next generation of pioneers, right? Yes, we love doctors, we love lawyers, we love, we continue, and they will also be innovators, but with Chat GPT and AI, all of these jobs may become obsolete soon, and it's really the creatives that will be well, leading the world in the next generation. But um so
So
that's kind of
hopefully,
our perspective. Yeah.
yeah, so hopefully with, you know, these types of I guess organizations like CKA, we are starting to break through that ceiling is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Okay.
and recognizing there is a ceiling, and that there's a ceiling to be broken, and and figuring out and strategizing how to break that ceiling.
Right.
We're
Right.
not quite there yet. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But we're doing a lot better job than before, and we're speaking up,
Hmm.
and we're identifying, and we're saying there's a problem here, and speaking power to power, and saying, hey, you try to cover up that there's not a problem, but there is a problem, and
Hmm.
here's evidence of that problem,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
this is what we're doing to break through. So
It's awesome. Man, Dr. Kim, I thank you so much for sharing your heart and your passion with me. I truly leave this conversation more knowledgeable and just really challenged, and continuing the podcast just in my little space here in Georgia. And I do have one question that I always ask my guests as we end our time together is
mhm.
you've shared so much great advice, but do you have any advice for someone listening that's maybe like, you know what, I want to be a leader. Like I want to
Yeah,
be the next, CEO or what I don't know, tech startup, CFO. Any of
yeah.
those things that we talked about. Like, do you have any advice for a young person listening? I actually Okay, do you have advice for like a high school student and then like a college student and then a post college student?
Yeah.
Because like I feel like it's so different, like how
Mhm.
you the different stages of life. If you don't, that's okay. But what is something you would say to any of those stages of life that maybe is thinking, hey, like what this guy's saying, I want to be a leader.
Right. Yeah, I think, I would say this one advice
Hmm.
for all those different stages, and it's a learning process at each of those stages, but I think the most important thing um, that a person uh, should be learning to be a leader is is really the science and the art of human relationships, right?
Mm,
How to make friends, how to persuade people, how to speak to people, how to engage people, and how to develop meaningful relationships with people, right? And how to earn trust, right? Because I mean, by definition, a leader means you have followers, right? And if people are going to follow you, they need to trust you, they
mm,
need to depend on you, and they also, they respect you, right? And that's hard, right? And that skill set is not an easy skill set. I mean, that's something they don't teach you that in the classroom, right? That
right,
comes with the
right.
experience engaging, developing relationships, making mistakes, repairing those mistakes, being humble, being self-aware, and being able to learn to be able to communicate with many different people with different backgrounds, and finding something that's a meaningful connection with the other, right?
Mm,
And to be able to build that trust through those meaningful connections, right? And
mm,
so that is a lifelong skill. I mean,
mhm.
that's something that you got to constantly learn and feel. And sometimes, it's not easy. I mean, it's difficult, and
Yeah.
people feel self-conscious. People feel like maybe the other people think I'm stupid because I'm not communicating very effectively, or whatnot. But we got to get over ourselves,
Yeah.
first of all, and secondly, there are certain skill sets that you could focus on, like how to how to communicate, how to think analytically, how to communicate effectively to different audiences, and how to just, what does it mean to develop a relationship? How to communicate, how to follow through, and how to build a trust. And so I would encourage, and that's a lifelong asset too, because friends and friendship and the people, your reputation, uh, will follow you,
Mm,
and it's amazing that even in the Korean American community, we're all, they say that's 6 degrees of separation. The Korean American is like 2 degrees of
yeah,
separation,
less,
right?
less.
It's less, and you'll be surprised in life. Those people you meet at younger periods of your life,
Mm,
strange reason, life has a way to surprise you where you may meet them 20 years later, but they will remember you from that time. And if it was a great reputation, that just reinforces your reputation in the future. But if
wow.
it was a bad reputation, then
Wow.
that could come back to haunt you. So
Yeah.
I've had I can't tell you how many times where I was a junior staff at some organization, and I was working with a number of, college interns, and 20 years later, they were my client, right, for some
Right.
job I was doing, right? And just because of those early relationships, they immediately build trust and say, "Hey, we're going to go with you. We're going to sign up with you,
Wow.
give you the business, or whatnot." Or I've had former students that I taught in grad school
Mm,
that later helped me to find jobs in other places, right? And that's
right.
because of those
Right.
relationships we built, making sure I mean, you can't get along with everybody, right? But to the extent you can,
Yes.
to ensure that you're known as someone who's with somewhat integrity, communicate very well, friendly, engaging, and have good people skills. And so that would be my advice to any young people, is just think about your people skills, your engagement, how to ensure that to protect your reputation, because those are all important intangible assets that will follow you for your lifetime, and it only builds cumulatively. So it might be something that's people like, wow, that's such a like big thing, but if you start early, it'll follow you and pay dividends when you
No,
get
yes.
older. So,
I mean,
so
sound advice. I hope everyone heard this is a
yeah,
key to life. Like,
yeah,
um, so, um, last question, Dr.
sure,
Kim.
yeah,
Thank you again for sharing that. Everything you just said makes so much sense. And, I'm like, okay, I got to implement this in my own children now. But how does one utilize the Council of Korean Americans, how does one, like get worked with your council, and like what does one need to do to
Yeah,
start these conversations?
sure, sure. So, well, first of all, um, if any of your audience members are interested, you can sign up to receive our emails,
Oh,
because we have a
great.
lot of resources, free resources, and on our website we actually do interviews and podcasts like this with leaders who have a heart for mentorship. So we've done
Mm,
a lot of interview programming of Korean Americans doing really interesting stuff,
that's
and
amazing.
you can, whether it's some news report or videos and things, that we point you to those directions, and you can get those resources by signing up as well. There are opportunities, like for example, for college students and recent grads, and who are interested in going into public service, and who wants to get an internship in Washington D.C. or New York, but maybe those internships are unpaid, so they're kind of they cost something, right? Uh, so we every summer we give out somewhere between 15 or so scholarships, right, to help students who do get a public service, like you're working for your local congressman's office or something like that. And we give scholarships
Mm,
to students. You have to apply for it, and there's an interview process. But um, but not the funny thing, but the sad thing is that we should be getting a lot more application, because this is literally free money we're giving
right,
out to Korean American students.
right.
But so I would encourage your listeners to, it's called an Emerging Leaders Program, Fellowship, SCK. So if you sign up, you'll get the information. We make the announcement for that. But also we have leadership programs um, for mid-career people. We do public webinars we interviewed, like, Johnny Kim, the astronaut, right? The Korean American
Yes.
astronaut. So we had a program on him, and we've interviewed just they just come on and they're just talking, and whoever signs up, it's a live interview. You could ask questions and things like that.
Oh, wow, what an
So
amazing resource. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So important Korean Americans, whether they're in space or entertainment or authors, or we've had a number of lots of cool programming. And
Right,
so
right.
and we videotape, I mean, not videotape, but we record it, digitally record it like this, and we also have it on our website, so you can see some of those interviews as well. So so yeah, our website is a good resource, and also getting on our mailing list, you'll get invitations for these kinds of resources as
Awesome.
well. In-person events too, and some of them are in Atlanta, Georgia as well. So
Oh
um
man, that's so great. Well, I'm excited to sign up, honestly. Um I'm sad that I just didn't know about the Council of Korean Americans, but now I
yeah,
do, and I'm much better for it. Dr. Kim, I can't thank you enough for your time. Guys, if you have any questions about this episode, please feel free to reach out. You can DM me on social media, or you can email me at podcastwigu@gmail.com. Dr. Kim, if there are any students or anyone listening that maybe
mhm,
have more questions for you, would you be okay with me kind of giving them your email address to contact you? I'm sorry to
yeah,
put you on the
yeah.
spot, but
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I do a lot of travel, so I mean, it might take some time for me to
yes,
respond,
yes.
but I'm happy to answer your questions, and if you want me back, if there's enough questions, I can come back and answer all those questions in another podcast or something like that.
That would be
So
awesome. A part 2 with Dr. Kim. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Until next time. Thanks, Dr. Kim. Bye.
thank you. Bye bye.